Yesterday, Riot announced the upcoming expansion Magic Misadventures, which naturally means it is spoiler season, it is reveal season. Now, in the kind of teaser and promo video, the cool cartoon that they released yesterday, we saw Ahri and we saw Kennen, so we can naturally assume those champions are coming to Legends of Runeterra. Today's card reveals appear to support Kennen. All signs point to these being Kennen support cards because a lot of them are cute little ninja yordles. And that also means we can make some other inferences as well. For example, today, all of the cards that were revealed are strictly in Bandle City. They are not Bandle City dual region, which means there's a strong chance that Kennen ends up being just Bandle City. Now, Kennen might be Bandle City and Ionia because there is an awful lot that synergizes between both of those regions when you're looking at this potential archetype. But there's also a chance that we just get Kennen solely in the Bandle City region. But either way, Kennen is likely going to be the kind of champion you want to play with Ionia because it is very recall centric, it would appear, based on the reveals today. And I have a lot to say about that kind of archetype, but we're going to cover the cards first and then I'll talk about the archetype. So let's just dive right in. We've got Gus Monk to talk about first. This is a 2-cost 2/2 with the Yordle tag, and it says when I'm summoned, create a Cloud Stance. Cloud Stance is a 1-cost burst spell, and it says give an ally +2/+0 and round end recall me this round. Bit of a mouthful, but it really just is a temporary bonus. It's not grant, it's give, and so it gives +2/+0, and then at the end of the round you recall that unit. It's also worth noting here, if you're paying attention, Cloud Stance does have a rarity gem. This is not a token card, so this means that if your deck ends up needing a lot of Cloud Stance, for example, you can run that card main deck and Gus Monk. So with that being said, let's talk about Gus Monk and Cloud Stance. They're okay, I guess, maybe. This one's really hard because until we see the rest of the archetype, it is not going to look good. I'm just going to be upfront. I don't think that this archetype is very enticing. Maybe it's just me as a player, I don't know, but this archetype just feels kind of lackluster when you compare it to existing options. For example, Gus Monk here is going to be compared to something like Conchologist, just naturally. It's a 2/2 for 2 and it creates another card. However, Gus Monk always creates Cloud Stance, whereas with the other option, you get a bit of variety, right? So you can get a different answer for a different scenario. Cloud Stance is always just going to be a combat trick, and while a burst spell that gives you +2 attack is still very relevant, it can help you out with trades. The real reason you want to run Cloud Stance, like if we're being honest, is probably that round end recall me, which means you're trying to create some sort of value engine through recalls. There's a number of cards that can take advantage of that, a number of ways that you can abuse that. So this could be fun with Zilean, for example, where you could block with Zilean, use Cloud Stance to buff the Zilean to get a trade. Zilean survives, bounces back to your hand, you replay him, you make more time bombs, that sort of thing if you want to be really cheeky. Or obviously there are things like droplets and more cards that we're going to cover in just a bit as well. So the recall effect is meant to be relevant in this archetype. However, that also means a lot of investment long term. And as I said before, I'm going to talk about that at the end of the video, but just in general, this is okay without seeing some sort of insane recall engine payoff. So if we're going to talk about a recall engine, let's talk about the next card. We have Tornado Warrior. It's a Yordle and it's a 2/2, but when I'm summoned, you grant me +1 and you get a random keyword as well. I keep these stat buffs and keywords when I'm recalled. So this is kind of meant to be one of your value engines for constantly recalling your own stuff, and it's okay. And I keep doing these dramatic pauses and then saying okay because that's really just the way that I feel about it. Tornado Warrior is interesting. I like the idea. I like the concept, the theory. However, I really wish this card said I keep all stat buffs and keywords instead of I keep these, because what this implies is that if you recall Tornado Warrior, the ones granted when it is summoned will stay, but any other permanent buffs will not stay. And that's problematic because that means this unit continually comes back down with only 2 health. If you're running this card, you're probably running a number of cards that allow you to recall your own units. So, you know, if you play this, it gets targeted by a Mystic Shot, you can probably bounce it back again. But the fact that you have to keep reinvesting in it over and over and over is a bit annoying because it's so brittle with only that 2 health. And it's a lot of investment over time as well. So you could play this 3 times, right? You could play it, bounce it, play it, bounce it, play it. You get a 5/2 with 3 keywords for 2 mana, which is a great payoff, but that also means that you've had to spend 2 mana to play it, mana to bounce it, 2 mana to play it, mana to bounce it, 2 mana to play it. So it should be busted because at that point you have likely invested somewhere around 8 or more mana in this single unit. And then when you think about it from that standpoint, 8 mana for like a 5/2 with 3 keywords is not really that enticing. And so I just wish that I kind of wish this was like a 1/3. I wish this was like Blade Twirler so that it was a bit more durable when it did hit the board. I do like that it is when I'm summoned, so any other flicker effects where, you know, things leave play and come back maybe help this, but usually those are death effects, so you can't really do like the Shadow Isles trick and get the long-term benefit. I think it's going to overwrite this effect because this is only kept when recalled, not when killed. And as a result, I think the card is fun. I will probably play around with it, but I just don't find myself being super excited about it. Now, I probably am not supposed to be super excited. This is a common after all. Most of the cards we're looking at are low rarity, but right now, just with these 3 cards, I see a recall engine with a potential payoff, but it's just not an exciting one. So I'm going to wait and see what Kennen does, and I'm going to wait and see what some of the other cards do. And so with that in mind, there were some other cards that were revealed today. We'll take a look at those real quick. So we have Quicken. Quicken is a 2-cost fast spell that says recall a unit with 3 or less power. I think this is the best card of the cards revealed today. It's going to naturally be compared with like Culling Strike, for example, because it's got that 3 power threshold. It is cheaper than Culling Strike, but it is only recall. It is not just straight up kill a unit, but because it is recall a unit, this means you can use it on your own as well. So this is very versatile, right? You can kind of use it offensively or defensively. I think that there's a lot of potential power with that. And of the cards that have been revealed today, the one that I would think sees the most play is probably Quicken, but it's still not necessarily amazing. It can have some really solid like blowout potential. So a Lee Sin that has not yet been leveled up could be recalled just to slow somebody down. Obviously somebody like Thresh or Swain, where if they're paying, 5 or more mana for a unit and you can bounce that back, that can really help you from a tempo standpoint. So I do think this card has a lot of uses. I think this is the one that will most likely see play, if any of them. But again, it's not like, oh my god, broken, I want to build a deck around it. Like, this is just a nice utility tool that you now can consider when you are deck building. And it is also just Bandle City, so you have to keep that in mind as well. The last card revealed was Thunder Fist. This is a 3-cost 2/3. It is a Yordle. It says, when I'm summoned, if you've summoned a Thunder Fist this game, transform me into a Masa Crashing Thunder. So Masa Crashing Thunder is a 3-cost 5/4 with impact. So you get a 2/3 with impact for 3 if it's the first time you've played it. But then after that, every other copy of this card or version of this card that you play is a 3-cost 5/4 with impact. So that is a very aggressive stat line. I think that's really solid. I think that the implication here is that you play Thunder Fist, you probably recall it back to your hand at some point, and then you play it a second time, and that gives you the 5/4, and then it gives you a 5/4 when you draw your other copies of Thunder Fist later on. Or it could just be the second or third one you play from your deck is also the 5/4. Maybe you never recall the first one, but any way you look at it, that first initial play is 3 mana for a 2/3 impact, and that's the part that hurts. So Long-term payoff, great. Short-term payoff, not great. And so that is... that's what I want to talk about. So this archetype is pointing in a direction that says Kennen is likely going to be something that is paying off you self-recalling your units. And it's interesting that Kennen ended up being this, because last night when I was streaming, somebody asked me what I felt like Ahri was going to end up being like in the game, and I said actually Ahri's really hard to pin down, because in League of Legends she's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. She's got assassin capability, she's got mage capability, she's got roaming capability, but she's not necessarily the best at any of those. She's just a good champion to kind of fill any of those. You can vary her playstyle depending on build and so on and so forth. And so I could see Ahri represented a number of different ways, right? Like they could make her charm be a forefront of her kit, and so that could be a spell where it forces the enemy to pick a unit and it starts a free attack, and now you get to dictate blockers. Or they could say, you know, maybe charm is a way to grant enemy units vulnerable, or maybe it just means Ahri has challenger, because even though we expect her to be an Ionia unit, there are actually Ionian units with challenger, so it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. And that could represent her being an assassin with the charm, or they could go the other way, and because she's a very nimble, mobile champion, and so they could give her elusive. She's got, you know, some life steal in her kit, so they could do that. I think there's a number of ways that you could say like Ahri makes sense. So I think she's hard to pin down. Now, I mentioned this because when I was explaining this last night, I said the only thing that I hope is that she doesn't end up like Katarina, because I think Katarina, as of right now, is the worst designed champion in Legends of Runeterra, because a long time ago, the dev team had mentioned that what they want is players to live their champion dream. They want every champion in the game to have a home and at least one deck or at least one archetype. So if I am a Nautilus fan and I want to play a Nautilus deck, I can build a deck around Nautilus. If I'm a fan of Lux, I can build a deck around Lux, and so on and so forth. And for the most part, even if those champions aren't viable, Yasuo is a great example, right? Yasuo is not good. None of these cards today are likely going to help him be good. Quicken's okay. But at least when you sit down and you're like, I want to build a Yasuo deck, you know what Yasuo is trying to do. And you have a couple of different ways that you can build that deck and live your Yasuo dream. Katarina is like the only champion in the game right now where I'm just never saying to myself, I want to build a Katarina deck. I want to build my deck around Katarina. She's always the afterthought. She's added as a one of or as a gimmick. You don't just sit down and like build a Katarina deck, because she spends most of her time off the board, which is also just not very good for the champion experience. So what I had said last night on stream is I just hope that they don't do with Ahri what they did with Katarina to represent her ability to hop around and be an assassin, because I don't want Ahri to just not be on the board. I want her to be something I can build around and experience and live that champion dream. Even if Ahri's not competitive, she's my favorite champion, so like I want to play her in a deck and have fun with it, right? Enter today's reveals, and it looks like, at least for Kennen, there's going to be a lot of recalling going on. And I don't know how I feel about that, because the problem with the self-recall archetype is that it usually requires you to invest in the unit multiple times, and you also have to invest in the cards that allow you to recall the unit, even if you have something as simple as like a monastery on the board, right? Monastery gives you a recall every round, and I've certainly built decks that abuse that and have a lot of fun with it, but you spend 3 mana up front and 1 mana every time you want to recall. That's just like the going rate for the self recall. So if you say, you know, Thunderfist, for example, with a single Thunderfist, you spend 3, you spend 1 to recall it, and you spend 3 again. So you're spending 7 to get to that first 5/4 impact. Now the future ones are all 3 mana 5/4s, but at that point you kind of have to play 2 of them to break even, and that doesn't really feel great. And as I was saying earlier with the tornado, again, you spend all of that mana and all that time to get that thing up to like a 5/2 or 3 keywords, and then you compare it to just playing a late game bomb or whatever, and it feels kind of bad. So usually the scaling with these self-recall mechanics isn't really worth the payoff, and it also hurts you just from a development standpoint because you have to continue to recall your own units to set up the combos and do the things. And so if you are continually every round playing the same unit and recalling it and playing the same unit and recalling it, even if that unit's getting bigger, your board is going vertical. And so if it doesn't have something like lifesteal that allows you to stabilize, excuse me, my brain is going faster than my mouth because I'm very I'm very heated about this topic. So even if you have a unit with like lifesteal and you're going vertical, your opponent is likely going wide. And in the more recent meta, they are almost absolutely going to be going wide one way or the other, whether that's with Plunder or with Poppy or whatever. And so you have to have a way to survive that and stabilize it. And you could do that. Maybe you supplement it with control effects. Maybe you play Shadow Isles or you play Freljord so that you can play these sweepers and so on and so forth. But then at that point, like, you're kind of just playing a control deck. And so the recall mechanic itself becomes an afterthought. It's more of a worse off win condition gimmick. And again, I say this as somebody who has spent a lot of time playing Monastery Zillion decks. I know that they're fun, but they're also just objectively not very good. And so right now, just based on today's reveals, I have some concerns about Kennen and Kennen's viability. But the good news is we have not seen a ton yet. We haven't seen the champion, and we're only on day 2 of reveals. So there's a lot of room for there to be redemption in this archetype, but we need better payoffs. We need better scaling payoffs for the recalls, because right now the existing ones are not good enough, because you got to spend a lot of time and mana and resources to get the payoffs. And traditionally it's going to take 2 or 3 plays for a lot of these before you break even. Again, the Thunderfist is a great example. You play Thunderfist until you play the second one, you're not really getting the payoff. Even if you don't do the recall gimmick, you play the first Thunderfist and you are below par. You play the second one, you're about breaking even on your 6 mana spent. You might be technically a little bit ahead, but at that point you're also likely later in the game unless you get really lucky. You know, you could play a Thunderfist on 3, play Crashing Thunder on 4, but even then that's, you know, a 5/4 impact on turn 4. Yes, you spent 3 mana for it, that's good, but that's not necessarily like the most busted turn 4 play ever. Like, we do live in a world where Turbo Thralls is a thing, so you get my drift, right? Like, the payoffs just don't feel like they're there yet. So I'm really hoping that Kennen does something amazing. I hope that Kennen makes me a liar and makes me regret making this video and saying that these feel lackluster. I hope Kennen knocks it out of the park, because I do think that it is a very cool archetype thematically. It is a play style that is unique that we have not fully explored yet, but right now the payoffs just aren't worth it. Like, you compare the payoffs for, you know, some of these cards and some of these synergies with like how Azir and Aurelia felt when that first got released, and it's nowhere close. So anyway, that's it for today's video. Now that I've been kind of a downer, sorry, I'm just like I'm a bit scattered, because like when I saw these I was simultaneously excited and disappointed, and it's just been messing with me. But I want to know if I'm wrong, if you're excited for this archetype. I want to know which of the cards you felt are potentially worth the payoff. Do you even want to build around these? Like, are these cards, when you see them, you say, yeah, I want to build a deck around that? You know, all of those things, because to me, that is, I've said it many times in previous reveal videos, the hallmark of good design is when you see something and you say, you know what, that's cool, I want to build a deck around it. This is a cool archetype, but these cards by themselves are not enough for me to say I want to build a deck around it. So I hope Kennen is great. I want to hear from you. Let me know what you're thinking. If you made it this far, if you've listened to all of my ranting and complaining, you're a saint. I love you. Thanks for watching. Until next time, may you walk on warm sands.